Can we really change and rewrite our past? And if so, is it possible to script out and design our future? Absolutely yes. I've discovered that this idea is in fact possible, and I'm the living proof that it is reality. You see, the truth is we each have the ability to rewrite our past, create and live in the present reality of our desires, and design the future we choose to exist in. It's all done through the power and gift of our wonderful imagination. My name is Joey Kramer, and in December of 2020, I rewrote my DNA, which has changed the direction of my life forever. And today, I'm here to share my journey with you and show you how you can rewrite your past and how you can create the reality you truly desire. The simple truth is, we've all been lied to. And the reality is, we're all far more powerful than we've ever been led to believe. Our sense of reality is being created through the stories we tell ourselves about our past. We've been taught by our families, our friends, our teachers, religion, and society to believe that we're not the ones in control of our lives. We've been taught to believe that we are just all victims in one way or another, simply living out our lives while waiting for the next ball to drop. This is the real lie we've each been told, and I'm here to tell you that it's simply not true. I'll show you that the reality we really have been living in isn't actually caused by anything or anyone, but rather is the direct result of the stories we've allowed ourselves to believe. And these stories are simply the figmentations of our imagination. You see, the stories we choose to tell ourselves are in fact the lies we allow to shape our reality, which creates our present moment, and in turn becomes the building blocks that design our entire future. The stories I'd been telling myself for 41 years had become the reality I had chosen to believe. Abandoned by my biological father at birth was just the beginning of many stories I told myself. They all resulted in spending most of my life suffering from depression, turning to alcohol, drugs, and even sex to fill the void that I felt existed within me. I also experienced sexual abuse as a child, and I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. So as you can imagine, I was a total mess on the inside. And the story I'd been telling myself was one of struggle, pain, and hardship. Even to the point I attempted suicide multiple times. But now I'm 42 years old, and for the first 41 years of my life, I lived in this lie that my life was out of my control and I was incapable of ever truly loving myself or anyone for that matter. Only by the grace of God in 2014, I began to put my pieces of my life back together. And it was there I discovered a power that had always existed within me. And it's the same power that exists within each and every one of you. It was only when I finally began taking responsibility for my past that I start the process of healing. Looking back, my life has been truly a fantasy. I wouldn't have changed a single moment of it, even if I could. Now, over the past 18 months, I've kickstarted my evolution into overdrive, and I've discovered my true purpose in life. And in December of 2020, I performed my own miracle, and I rewrote my DNA. You may be asking, how exactly did I do this? Well, that's the best part of my story. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to me. It all began when I attended a Tony Robbins Date with Destiny event. Now, I was attending the event with a single purpose in mind. I wanted to remove this anger and this frustration I'd been living with all my life, and it still raged within me. This, I believed, was the final piece of the puzzle, the thing that had been holding me back from finding my true destiny. So after the first day, I began to realize that all this anger and all this rage I'd been feeling my entire life had come from this feeling of abandonment I'd suffered when my father left me at birth. I realized that all this pain and all this misery I had imposed on myself was actually just a story I had created and had convinced myself was true. So on the morning of day 2, I decided I'd sit down and I'd write a letter to my father and forgive him for all the subconscious anger I had felt about his leaving. I believed it was going to help me get this huge burden off my back. Needless to say, I didn't even make it through one sentence. I broke down and I cried like I'd never cried before for an hour straight. Suddenly, this huge weight had been lifted off of me, and I began to get my composure back. I looked down at the letter that I had attempted to write, and I realized there was no longer any need to actually write this letter. I was able to now see that this event and every event of my life actually had nothing to do with him, or anyone else for that matter, but in fact, it had everything to do with me. He wasn't the cause of my pain. He was just the lie I had created to shield myself from my own failures. I realized then that the only person I really needed to forgive was myself. Now, fast forward to day 5 of this event. And day 5 is known as Transformation Day. And that night, we performed a meditation exercise in which we would each go back and recall our earliest childhood memories. What appeared to me was something I'd forgotten all about. And at that moment, I was seeing myself as a 5-year-old boy. And I was on a trip with my mom. We were headed down to Texas to visit my father, which I assumed was her attempt to win him back. We were told first to go back to this event and to place ourselves into our bodies and begin seeing and reliving that moment. What was I doing? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? We were then told to remember what were we thinking right before the event took place. For me, I remembered that I was just this small little boy who wanted desperately to have a father in his life. I remembered how badly I wanted this to be. To feel loved, to feel normal, to be like all the other kids who had dads. It was at that moment that I began to feel the fear and the anxiety of the situation. I began thinking to myself, what if I screw this up? What if he doesn't love me? Would I be good enough for him? I then remembered how I felt, as if all of this was on me. And if he didn't come home, it was ultimately going to be my failure. And then I realized, wow, what an amazing amount of pressure I just put on myself, all for something I couldn't even possibly have controlled. So I watched myself as I played on the jungle gym and I was climbing the monkey bars, all the while thinking, am I good enough for him? Is he seeing what an amazing son I can be? I thought, look at me. If I was perfect in this moment, then surely he would want to come home and be my dad. Next, we were told to put ourselves in the other person's eyes. See and feel what they were seeing, thinking, and feeling. I saw through my mother's eyes, and I began to see and feel her pain, her desires, and her fears. I now understand that all she ever really wanted from me was to give me a real father. She desperately wanted to be loved by this man who had left us. I truly felt the struggle she was having inside, but I knew how badly he hurt her. And at this point, she didn't know where else to turn or what else to do. I saw her searching for something more. She desperately wanted his love for both of us. I then understood the pressure she must have been under and the pain she had suffered. I felt her willingness to try anything to reunite our family. And as I felt this, I began to cry for her and for her pain. Finally, we were asked if there was anyone else involved, put ourselves in their body and in their mind and see and feel through their eyes And it was at that point I entered into my Father's eyes. And I saw through his mind. And I instantly felt his pain and the stress from this meeting. I now saw the fear and the anxiety he had about the idea of coming back home and becoming a husband and a father. The fact was, he'd run away to escape us all the way down to Texas and all of the responsibilities as a husband and a father. And now, here we were on his doorstep, asking him to come home and trying to control his life. It was at this moment I experienced what he was feeling, and I saw what he was seeing. And it was only then I realized we were all just scared and unsure of what we actually wanted from each other or from this meeting. When the exercise was over, I was no longer the person I had been just a few short minutes ago. I had seen and felt true compassion. I had understood the meaning of true forgiveness. And in that moment I experienced love in a way I'd never known it before. And it unlocked something within me, something that I never knew I had. It was an amazing feeling. But little did I know what was still left to come. The event ended the next day, and I knew I still had one last thing to do. It took me 2 days, but I finally got the courage up to pick the phone up and call my mom. I wanted to share this amazing experience with her, what I had just had, and the healing that had just taken place with me. The conversation began with me telling her how much I loved her and how I forgave her for anything she thought she may have ever done wrong in raising me. I told her that I also forgave myself for the story I'd been telling that scared little boy all these years, and for the lie I'd been choosing to believe. I told her I even forgave Robert for his leaving, and that I understood why he did what he had to do. I thanked her, and I told her how much I appreciated everything she had ever done for me. She went on to say she wished at times she would have been a little harder on me, but I responded to her, "Mom, you did everything exactly right in the exact way it needed to be done." I reminded her of how fragile I used to be, and that in all likelihood, if she would have been any harder on me, I probably would have broke. Now, at this point in our conversations, the tears, they were flowing from both of us, and that's when she paused to say to me, "Joey, there's something I need to tell you." She went on to say that she'd been keeping a secret from me for 41 years, and that it was only known by 3 other people in the whole world. My stepfather Bill, my birth father Robert, and my Uncle John, who passed away a year prior. She said she was determined that they would all take this secret to the grave, and that secret had been now weighing on her for 41 years. I could sense this need of her to release this, and she began telling me the truth. Through her tears, she said to me, "Joey, Robert is not your father." I thought to myself, what did she just say? And with a little excitement, a little anticipation, I responded with a smile, and I said, "Go on." She began to tell me how badly she wanted a child and how Robert, he couldn't bear children. So she sought out every possible path she could find. She said she even went as far as the Colombian embassy to see about adopting an orphan. Now at this point I had to stop her. In my total amazement, I asked, wait a minute. Is this why I get so tan? And why I'm the only person in my entire family with bright blue eyes? Am I half Colombian? She responded through tears and said, "No, honey." Fact was, she worked at a hospital in Kansas City, and they were doing an experimental procedure in 1978 called in vitro fertilization. She decided to enroll in this experiment, and both her and Robert, they signed off on all the necessary paperwork, and the rest was history. It was at that moment that I now understood and discovered that I was no longer the son of an alcoholic, womanizing man who had abandoned me at birth, but in fact, I was actually the biological son of a medical student who later became a doctor at the hospital. I was in total amazement at what I just heard. It was only then that I realized what had actually just happened. In real time, I rewrote my entire life story, which included my biological DNA. I realized now that the story I'd been telling myself all these years was complete bullshit and one big lie. This man whom I had blamed for all of my suffering for the first 41 years of my life was simply nothing more than just my mom's first husband, who just so happened to leave her when I was born. In all of this, I found that through my own compassion, forgiveness, and love, I was able to finally accept my past and then completely rewrite it into an entirely new story. And not only did I rewrite my entire past, but I also opened the doors to a new and brighter future for both me and my two sons, who are now the biological grandchildren of a doctor. And if that wasn't amazing enough, I also realized that by rewriting my own story and my own DNA, I also set my mother free from this secret, burden, and lie that she had been forced to carry with her for 41 years. I discovered that by loving her unconditionally and by taking full responsibility and owning my past, in addition to forgiving myself and everyone involved, I unleashed a power within me that now had the ability to create and write an entirely new story for my life, which was being scripted now by my design. For each of us here, our lives are being lived right here and right now. This moment is all there is. And by choosing to dwell on our past and blaming ourselves or others for our failures, we're only continuing to live in the lie that we've been taught to believe is true. We each possess this amazing power and ability. We can decide exactly how our stories will play out, and we can choose how they will be written through the power of compassion, forgiveness, and love. I learned that we each can discover this greatness that's hidden within us. And at the end of the day, what do you have to lose by committing yourself to practicing these three principles: compassion, forgiveness, and love? I can assure you one thing, that if you leave here today and you go home and you continue living by the same stories and the same lies you've been telling yourself about your past, then I promise you, things will stay exactly the same for you. Or they might get worse. But there's another option, and a better one. Instead of repeating the same mistakes, you can go home today and begin living by these three principles, and you can begin your own process of forgiving yourself for the stories we've allowed to play out in our minds. You see, when we stop allowing these stories of our past to define us, we can begin to embrace the possibilities of our imagination and our desires, and that they can really create our reality. Only then can we rewrite the stories of our past and begin to script a new history and design a future any which way we can choose to dream it. So in closing, I have one question for each of you as you leave here today. How will you choose to write the script and the story of your life? Will you embrace these three principles and take back your true power, or will you continue to allow your future to be written by your past? The choice is truly yours. Thank you.